Hello, friends. It's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and we are now more than halfway through the Every Bit Counts challenge. This is the challenge in the month of August where we try to preserve something every single day of the month, no matter how little it is. The goal is just to get something put away. The month of August is also really busy here on our homestead with other things. We started back to school this past week, and so that is presenting some challenges with preserving. I am now have to fit all of my preserving projects after 1 o'clock, and so I can no longer just start first thing in the morning and get to canning. So we're going to see what I was able to accomplish with the added work of school this week. So I started on Monday and needed a rather easy project because we were kind of overwhelmed with getting back into the swing of school. I decided to chop up some apples here. I have them soaking in a mixture of water and lemon juice with some cinnamon sprinkled in. These are the apples that we picked at a friend's house last week. We're just going to get these on some freeze dryer trays. We also took 2 trays worth of pineapple and chopped that up because freeze-dried pineapple has become one of our absolute favorite treats. Actually, any kind of fruit freeze-dried is pretty good. I don't think there's a freeze-dried fruit that we've tried yet that we didn't like. So these were overnight in the freeze dryer, and the goal with these fruits is just to have them available on the pantry shelves for snacks for the kids. Over the winter, when fresh fruit may not be available, the kids can grab some of these out and make a little trail mix, a fruit mix of sorts from various freeze-dried fruits, and that will be a great snack for them. So Miss Elizabeth was getting them in jars for me, and she's shoveling them in her mouth as a joke, but she said they taste like candy. So these are just a delicious treat. So this was just a really easy thing to start the week off for us. We're going to get into some more in-depth canning later in the week, but I needed something really easy as we were getting adjusted to the new school year. And so the next day we were able to do a little bigger project. I ran out to the garden and I harvested all the various types of beans we have growing. Now, the bunnies have not been kind to me this year and they have decimated my bush beans, but my pole beans are still going strong because they're up off the ground and the bunnies can't reach them. So I am just snapping these beans. I have a mixture of various types of long beans. And I also have some pole beans that are just regular, like Kentucky pole beans, and we snapped those, and we are just going to raw pack these in jars. I love to use wide mouth jars for this purpose so that you can really get your hand in there. I kind of tilt the jar on its side and pack them in there as tightly as I can to get the most in there as possible. We're going to get all of these jars filled, and then we're going to pressure can these. And this wasn't a huge batch. As I mentioned, the bunnies have done a number on my bean harvest, but we were able to get 5 quarts, and that's 5 quarts more than I had at the start of the day. We're just filling with water and debubbling the jars. And then we're going to get our lids on the top. These are 4 jars canning lids. They're my absolute favorite, and you can get 10% off your canning jars if you use the code that is in the video description. We're going to get the rings on these jars, and then we're going to pressure can these for 25 minutes. And when we're done, we'll have some shelf-stable green beans to use as a side dish this winter. Now, some of those long beans are a purple color that you can see, and some of them are kind of speckled green and purple. They're so pretty. They start out in the jar that way, but once you cook any kind of colored bean like that, they actually end up green after you cook them. So that's kind of fun. All right, the next day, and we're on to another project. I had Adam home in the afternoon. He was helping watch the children so I could get busy, and I decided to make some apple chutney. I have lots of these apples to use up from the last video that we had harvested from a friend's orchard. I've never made chutney before, but it sounded like something Adam would love, and so I decided to try this out this year. So I will link the recipe that I used in the video description. The first thing I'm doing here is just chopping up my apples. I need 16 cups of apples total. So I'm coring these. I am not peeling. That's something I feel comfortable doing while canning, but you just have to decide for yourself whether that's something you feel comfortable doing or not. And I'm just slicing these really thinly like I would for apple pie filling. And we're going to get this pot filled with these apples, and then we'll move on to the next step. As always, I will be saving the cores of all of these apples to use for other things like apple scrap jelly, or I make an apple scrap vinegar, and you can see the last video that I made for instructions on how to make both of those items. But we never let anything go to waste here on our homestead. We try to repurpose as much of the scraps as possible. The next ingredient that we're going to add to our chutney is onion. I grabbed a couple of the medium-sized onions that are right now curing inside of our house, and we're going to chop those up. I'm just doing kind of thin slices. We needed 1 cup of onion total, and so 2 medium onions provided that. The next thing we're going to add is pepper. I grabbed some green peppers from the garden. We're going to chop these up, dice them up. We need 1 cup total of that. I believe the recipe called for sweet red peppers, but we don't currently have any red peppers growing on the vine, so green peppers will do. We're going to go ahead and use those. The recipe also called for some hot peppers, so I grabbed some Sugar Rush peach peppers and I'm de-seeding them to cut the spice a little bit. We're just dicing a couple of those up and adding them to the mix for a little bit of heat. Now we need some garlic. I crushed a couple cloves. We're going to add that to the pot. And then the next ingredient is raisins. The recipe called for golden raisins, but I do not have those in the house. So we're just using regular raisins, and I'm measuring out 12 ounces total of those raisins. Now this recipe calls for a lot of sugar. It calls for 4 cups of brown sugar. I added my regular cane sugar, and then we're going to add a little bit of molasses to give that brown sugar flavor. And I know that seems like a lot of sugar, and in my last video people mentioned that a lot of my apple recipes had a lot of sugar in them, and I feel comfortable with that because these are just a condiment. We're just going to drizzle a little bit of this onto our food. The next thing we need is 4 cups of apple cider vinegar. Remember, you want to make sure your vinegar is 5% acidity. If you're using homemade vinegar, you're going to want to test that acidity to make sure it's safe for canning. Now we're going to add our spices. We're going to add 3 tablespoons of dried mustard. Next, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of ginger. And then we're going to do 2 teaspoons of allspice and 2 teaspoons of salt. And as always, you could adjust those spices however you would like it. I'm not a huge fan of ginger, but my husband loves it and I'm making this for him. But if I were making this for myself, I would probably omit the ginger because I don't particularly love that flavor. And so now we're going to mix all of this together. It's looking beautiful here in the pot, and we're going to get that on the stove and let it simmer down, cook down, and thicken up. Now, as I've mentioned, I've never made a chutney before. This is totally new for me, but I just knew this combination of flavors was something that my husband would love. My goal for these is to use them mostly as a marinade. People have told me they'd be great on top of pork chops. I think my husband would love that. He might also like this if I baked some homemade bread this winter and then toast it up and kind of slather some of this over the top of it. So for now, we're just going to get our jars filled here. I have my little funnel, and we are going to can this in pints because I think that's a reasonable amount that we would use for a meal. And we had a little bit left over, and I let my husband try it on some bread that evening. I've been told, though, that chutney really needs several months in the jar for all of those flavors to fully infuse. Adam really liked it as it was, but I'm assuming it'll just get better over time. So now we're making sure to really wipe those rims well. And we're going to get these lidded up, and these can be water bath canned despite having all of those vegetables and things in it. Because we added so much vinegar, the pH level of this is it's acidic enough that it can safely be water bath canned. And these are just going to process then for 10 minutes in the water bath, and then we'll have lovely little shelf-stable chutney jars. This is what it looked like coming out, and we'll just let these sit for several months and enjoy those this winter. So I ran out to the garden to see what needed my attention, and I noticed that the celery really needed to be harvested. If I harvest it now, it'll have a chance to regrow, and then we can get another harvest here before our first frost that happens in mid-October here in my zone. And this looked beautiful to be preserved. I had actually asked on Instagram for ideas for what to do with celery because in a previous video this month, I've already freeze-dried a bunch to use for broth and things. I made celery salt. I put some in the freezer, and so I wanted some new ideas for things to try with celery. And several people told me that they love to pickle celery, and that pickled celery is delicious in things like chicken salad and egg salad. So that's what I decided to do with this harvest of celery. I'm chopping it up into little pieces that are the size that I would put in things like potato salad or chicken salad. And I'm getting them into my colander. We're going to wash these after we get them sliced. It was just a little easier to do it that way. Now that we have them all clean, I got my little half-pint jars all washed and ready to go. And I'm going to crush some garlic. And I'm going to put about 1 clove of crushed garlic per jar here. Now, whenever you're pickling vegetables in this way, you can add basically whatever spices and things that you would like. This is just what I like. We like a little garlic flavor, and then I grabbed some cayennes from the garden, and I went ahead and put a little bit of each cayenne in there, a little bit of Sugar Rush peach pepper. I put a few peppercorns in the bottom, and then we're going to add about 1/4 teaspoon of salt per jar. But you could add whatever you would like in there. If you want mustard seed, if you wanted some dill, whatever you like in it. Now we're going to make our brine. I did 2 parts vinegar to 1 part water to 1 part sugar, and that's the ratio that I'm using for this brine. I wanted the sugar in there to help kind of kick the heat, and I wanted this to be like a sweet relish that you would use in something like a tuna salad or things like that I normally buy sweet relish for. I can just use this pickled celery in place of the relish. So now we're going to go ahead and fill our jars up with the chopped celery. And we are going to then, in the meantime, that brine is heating up on the stove so that the sugar dissolves. All of the leftover celery that I had went into a big jar. I soak it in cold water and keep it in the fridge, and that will keep that celery nice and crunchy so that it doesn't go soft in the fridge until we're ready to use that in another meal. Now I'm just taking my brine. The sugar has already dissolved, and so we're just pouring that over the chopped celery and filling up the jars, making sure to wipe those rims because there is sticky sugar in that. And then we're going to get these on the stove and process them for 10 minutes in the water bath. Once again, as long as we added that vinegar brine, it is acidic enough to be safely water bath canned. I am still working through those apples, so I decided to go ahead and get a bunch of them chopped up and in the crock pot kind of early in the day, and I let them cook down for most of the day. This is a really hands-off, easy way to make applesauce. By that evening at about 9 o'clock, those apples had cooked down, and I decided to run them through my food mill and just get a little batch of applesauce in the canner. It's not going to amount to much because my crock pot is pretty small, but it helped me get some apples processed, and at this point of the year, I just need to get stuff in jars. So we got 5 little pints of applesauce, and this was really easy. It took about 10 minutes of my time. We're going to get those in the water bath canner. I'm also, as soon as I got done, I chopped some more apples up, put them in the crock pot overnight so that in the morning I could do the same thing and do another little batch. These little pints of applesauce only take 15 minutes to process, so it's a really easy job to get done. All right, I also picked up 4 bushels of peaches. I am in over my head in fruit, but it is a huge blessing. So I need to do something with these peaches. I went to the garden and grabbed a bunch of peppers. We're having a great year for peppers here in our garden. And I decided I'm going to make peach salsa. I love peach salsa. It's one of my favorite things to do with peaches. And so this was the first priority in doing my peach canning. We got these bushels of peaches. My friend has a hookup with the local Amish, and we got these peaches for a steal. They are cling peaches, but they were only $31 a bushel, which is just an amazing price. And so I am having to do some work to remove the pit since they are clings. What I like to do is just chop around the pit and leave all of that peach flesh attached to the pit. And as you can see, I'm putting them in a little bowl next to the cutting board. And we are not going to let all that fruit go to waste that is attached to the pit. We're going to use that in another way. As you know, nothing will go to waste here in this kitchen. We will find a use for it. So I'm just chopping my peaches into tiny little kind of chunks. Some people like a smoother peach salsa. You can cut it however you like. We just do little chunks of peach. I will be busy preserving peaches for the next week. I will be doing pie filling, peach sauce, peach slices, you name it. It's peach jam. We're going to be doing a lot of peaches, but this was the first priority in my canning. And for my peach salsa recipe, I needed a total amount of 18 cups of peaches. That will produce for me approximately maybe 9 to 11 pints of peach salsa. And so just getting busy chopping that. Okay, the next ingredient that we need in our salsa is 4.5 cups of bell pepper. And I was very excited that we had that many peppers available for this recipe. There have been previous years where I have struggled to grow peppers, but my garden's doing terrible with tomatoes this year, but for some reason peppers are thriving. So I will take it and we will do as many recipes involving peppers as we can to get those preserved and saved up and in jars. So much like with the pieces, I'm just chopping these up into like little chunks that kind of match the sizes of the peaches, and that will work for our recipe. I mostly use this peach salsa as I pour it over my pork roasts and allow those to roast in the oven, and the peach flavor just really complements that pork roast. The next ingredient that we need is onion. I just grabbed some of the smaller ones from what I have curing in the house. We need a total of 1.5 cups of onions, and I'm also excited. We had a really good onion harvest this year. I showed you that a couple videos ago, and so it's been really nice to have all of these onions available for my various canning projects throughout the month of August. It's nice to get those preserved in jars instead of having to find a place to store them down in the cellar for fresh uses. And that's really my focus this year, is trying to can more meals and items that are pre-made to save myself time over the winter. Okay, the next ingredient we need 1.25 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. That's going to give it a little bit of a kick. The next thing we need is 5.5 teaspoons of chopped garlic. This is also homegrown garlic. We also had a really amazing garlic year. So it's just really exciting to know that everything basically but the peaches is going to be homegrown in this recipe. We need 3 cups of brown sugar. Once again, just adding a little bit of molasses. I rarely ever buy brown sugar. I just tend to make it myself out of the things that I have in the house. It's just one less thing I have to buy. Next, we're going to add 3.5 cups of vinegar. I'm doing white distilled vinegar just because that's what I have in the house. We're doing 1.5 cups of water, and that is the extent of the ingredients. It's pretty simple. We're going to get that all mixed together, and we're going to get that on the stove and let it kind of cook down a little bit. And then after maybe 20 minutes of cooking, I'm able to fill my jars here. And these are going to process in the water bath canner for 15 minutes, and we will really enjoy these. As I mentioned, I primarily use these in my pork roast throughout the year. I'll probably do one more batch of these here in the next week or so, and that should be enough to meet our peach salsa needs for the coming year. Sometimes I'll open a jar and snack on them. It just sort of depends on what I'm in the mood for. Speaking of snacking, I also needed to get some peaches in the freeze dryer. As I mentioned earlier in this video, we're trying to freeze dry as much fruit as possible to have available for snacks throughout the year. Freeze-dried peaches are just amazing. There's something about the freeze-drying process that just really concentrates the sugars, and they're a really pleasant texture. They're so light and fluffy. And so we got 4 trays full of peaches going into the freeze dryer. My little buddies here are wanting to pull off of the trays, and I'm like, no, you can have a whole peach. We do not have a shortage of peaches in the house. I will slice you up a whole peach to enjoy, like Levi's having there. And these will be going into the freeze dryer. Now let's talk about those cores that I mentioned, or the pits. You can see there's a lot of fruit left on those. I went ahead and dumped those pits into a little pot. We added some water, and then I'm going to grab a couple of vanilla beans. This is my jar of homemade vanilla extract that I'm making, and there's a bunch of beans in there, so I don't mind pulling out a couple of those. And we're going to get those sliced up, and we're going to add that into our pot here of peach pits. That'll give a lovely vanilla flavor to this jelly that we're going to make from these scraps. We just put this on the stove. I let it simmer for about 25 minutes or so. And in the meantime, we're going to prepare things to make jelly. This is Pomona's pectin. This is the pectin powder that you purchase. It comes with this right here. This is a calcium powder. The Pomona's pectin is activated by calcium, and you have to make a calcium water from it. So in a half a cup of water, I put a half a teaspoon of the calcium water, and then we stir that together, and this will be added to the liquid ingredients in our jelly. So after the pits were done simmering, I'm just kind of trying to run them through this colander and get all the extra juicy bits out of there, all of that flavor, and it's dripping through into my bowl underneath. That is going to be the juice that we're going to use to make this jelly. I needed to measure out how much I have, and I ended up with about 3 cups of this peach juice. So I'm just adjusting my basic Pomona's pectin jelly recipe to make sure that it will gel with 3 cups of juice. So I added a little less than 1/4 cup of lemon juice, and then we're just going to add 3 teaspoons of that calcium water that I just prepared. Always make sure to mix that up to make sure the calcium powder is thoroughly mixed in before you add it to your juice. So just 3 teaspoons of that, and that's the extent of our wet ingredients. We're going to get that on the stove boiling up. Now that leftover calcium water does not go to waste. I can just put a lid on it and put it in the jar, and then the next batch of jelly that I make, that will be ready to go, and I can use that in that. Now we need our dry ingredients. So I have 3/4 a cup of sugar there, and I'm just going to add 3 teaspoons of the Pomona's pectin. Now, Pomona's pectin, what makes it special is that it's a low sugar pectin. We're going to mix that together, and in a normal batch of jelly this size, you would use a ton of sugar. Just that 3/4 a cup of sugar will allow this jelly to set, and that it really is a low amount of sugar for a jelly recipe. So now that the liquid ingredients were boiling, I'm just adding those dry ingredients to it and making sure to stir it around so that nothing clumps up. We're going to return this then to the stove and let it come back up to a boil for a minute. And when that's all done, we can go ahead and fill our jars. So we only got 2 little pints of jelly out of this, but hey, it's from scraps that would otherwise go to waste, so I am calling it a win. We're going to get those in the water bath and process them for 10 minutes. So you guys, by this point of the year, my kitchen is wrecked. I have jars of food all over my house just needing to be organized. We just have bushels of produce. We have things curing. We have boxes of things that need to be processed, and it is a mess, but it is a blessing to have this mess. I'm definitely not complaining, but it is time for me to get my cellar built up. I haven't had time because I've been so busy with canning projects. I haven't been working in the cellar. So that is the goal for this week. We're going to be moving things down, and I'll take you along on that in this week's video. Otherwise, the canning projects are really not going to be slowing down. As soon as I get through the peaches, it's going to be time to be moving on to tomatoes, finish processing peppers, and everything else that is growing in this garden that is currently looking like a jungle, but it's a productive jungle. But my focus right now is not on weeding gardens and caring for plants. It's in educating my children. I feel like fall is almost here. We noticed that the vines on these pumpkins were dying back, and these pumpkins were at risk of my dogs finding them and chewing on them. These are volunteer pumpkins that had grown out in the yard, and so we decided to go ahead and pick these and get them curing up by the house. And if there's something about sunflowers growing and pumpkins curing by the house that really makes me feel like autumn is here, and I am ready for it. I just need to push through the rest of the month of August, get all of the food in jars, and then things will begin to slow down here in the fall and we can enjoy the change of the seasons. So thank you for being here and watching this video. I will be back next week with a cellar update as well as more preserving videos.